All right. Well, here we are, Blake. Wow. It's flown by so fast, but it has been a joy. And we are super excited. Our last speaker, I am looking forward to hearing from Dr. Jennifer Davis today. And we want to give her a lot of time. We want to thank you guys for joining us, and Dr. Davis, thank you for being here, and welcome. It means so much that you would be willing to share with our student family today. So we're going to give you a lot of time. So we're going to go ahead and hand the mic or the baton off to you. Welcome.
All right, thank you. I can't recall if it was last year. I know that this is the second year that I've been able to participate, and there were a lot of lasting questions that have stayed with me, and I um, definitely thought of them as I was preparing to speak today. So hopefully, uh, hopefully that'll go well. Anyway, so my name is Jennifer Davis, and I am a clinical forensic psychologist. Um, there's a lot that goes into that, so I'll kind of like start at the beginning. I knew growing up that, well, it took my mom telling me, like, I don't think that math is your strong suit, so being an astronaut might not be a good way to go. So I definitely had to kind of reconvene and think about what I did want to do. Um, Growing up, people would always come to me and share a lot of things. A lot of problems that they were going through, and I don't know what it is about me. Just people had always kind of sought me out, which actually went well with my personality because I'm also very I don't know the correct way of saying this other than to just say I'm a very nosy person. So knowing all of the things that I can about someone, and a little disclaimer, although I don't do this to just anybody, but I am that person that goes into like bathrooms and looks in medicine cabinets. So I'm like that type of nosy. So anytime I'm asked now, why do you do what you do? Well, now I can say that I get paid to be nosy. I get paid to know all of the things about someone. Um, Paired with growing up, like, and even now, puzzles. Like, I love to see how each individual piece works into this bigger picture of things. So I think, to be honest, I don't even know when it started. Knowing why people do the things that they do really kind of came up probably in high school. And the idea of like looking at someone or like the things that are going on and people's behavior or the things that they're doing, saw it really as an opportunity to put together this puzzle piece. And instead of just looking at one particular behavior, seeing it as something in this bigger picture, I think has absolutely helped, especially in choosing to go into forensics. I think sometimes family especially are like, well, why that population? Why do you want to work in forensics? I think it's because often, most of the time, unfortunately, people kind of don't see a bigger picture. They just see that person for the things that they have done in that moment. So I really think that it's a very underserved and very misunderstood population to work with. Uh, so I knew I wanted to go into forensics and psychology pretty much by the time I graduated high school. But at the time, I really didn't have an idea of like how to do that or how even one becomes a psychologist. So I ventured into undergrad and did a major in psychology. I was very disappointed by the end of my 4 years in my undergrad to realize that that doesn't make someone a psychologist. So I had to kind of struggle, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to continue on in school and the schooling that it would take at the time. So I had to reconvene and figure out, well, what can I actually do with my undergrad in psychology? Um, which took me into a career in providing services to people struggling with substance use. More specifically, I worked in there's two different fields with substance use. There's harm reduction and abstinence-based programs and models. I was fortunate to work in the harms reduction, so medically assisted relapse prevention clinics, more specifically. In my time there, like it was definitely very interesting, and it was closely related, or as close as I could get, to psychology and forensics, because there's a lot of individuals that come into substance use treatment because of court orders or reasons that they need to complete probation. So it definitely kind of like satisfied that need of mine to be able to help somebody in the forensic population. Eventually from there, probably spent about 10 years before I decided to go on and really get into becoming a psychologist, because that desire never really went away. Um, but I didn't know where to go for a forensic psychology degree. So I ended up taking another detour into marriage and family counseling and got a master's in that. That really opened up the door to being a clinician. And I know that there's a lot of different terms to mental health professionals, whether it's a counselor, a clinician, a therapist, a psychologist. At that point, I was a master's level clinician. I could provide mental health services, or I could provide psychotherapy to individuals. I was in that program. I was about to graduate with that when there was a school in Sacramento that started offering a PhD program in forensic psychology. So I didn't actually hit the ground running in my marriage and family career before I was able to get into that PhD program. So I was really happy that that opened up, because it meant that I didn't have to move anywhere to just complete my ultimate goal for education. So I completed 4 years of that, and along the way, had a lot of professors kind of talk to us about, yeah, this isn't like, when you graduate with this doesn't mean that you get to fly around in a Learjet. It doesn't mean that you're working with all of like the FBI's top wanted list. So trying to really make sure that they focused us on what it was that a forensic psychologist did. And to be honest, trying to think about how I would talk about that and describe that here at this career fair really still has me scratching my head, because there's so many different things that a psychologist can do. A psychologist doesn't even have to go through a forensic program to do forensic work, and vice versa. I could go into the community and work at Kaiser as a psychologist. It doesn't necessarily mean that I would be in a prison setting. So really kind of narrowing it down to a forensic psychologist, what that really just does is give me a specialized education in anything forensic. So oftentimes I think, well, to be honest, I don't know what a lot of people think that I do, to be honest. I think a lot of the people outside of psychology just, again, see that Criminal Minds and just assume that I am flying around on a Learjet, and it's not that fancy. But it's still it very much satisfied that desire to be nosy and put pieces of puzzles together. I had initially wanted to do a lot of work with the courts. And I know that California especially has done a lot to work on specialty courts. I think one of the things that really kind of set me in motion, and kind of the soapbox that I get on, is seeing individuals come into our incarcerated population, and really this is not the place for them. They need some form of treatment, but unfortunately the times have not caught up with being able to provide that for individuals. So some of the things that California specifically has been doing, and not just California, but I am proud of our state for doing it. We have mental health courts that work with individuals that have mental health that may have led them into or committing a crime. So they're really not just looking at the crime that they committed and putting them into a prison setting, but maybe there's a diversion or there's some other program or treatment that they could get involved in and not have to go through prison. There's also veterans courts, but the specialty courts are definitely a good start to finding where or how individuals could rather come into treatment instead of just being incarcerated. So initially I thought that that's where I was going to go, is to do a lot of these assessments for courts. The stars, I think, are still in my eyes with regard to doing those assessments for court, because a lot of times people think of like not guilty by reasons of insanity, or individuals that commit crimes that have mental health issues, but there's still also some very underlying like criminal behavior and activity that also needs to be addressed through the courts. So that's where a forensic psychologist can come in and do a lot of different assessments to see, like, was the mental illness something that prevented them from knowing right from wrong? And if so, then they shouldn't be held to the same standard as someone that's committing the same crime and knew right from wrong. So that would be one of the assessments that could be done. Um, there's a lot of different things that, like, just even being called on to provide expert testimony, to be qualified as an expert for the courts, you just have to be able to know kind of the best standard practice in my field and be able to present that to the court. There are also a lot of things that forensic psychologists do in family court, a lot of assessments for like child custody issues and cases, to see where the best fit would be to make those decisions on where children are going to live with parent-wise. So initially that's where I thought that I would end up. Where I am is working for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So I do work in prison and provide mental health care to the prison population. There's a lot of opportunity for mental health professionals to work in the prison system, and I think there's probably not a day that doesn't go by that some patient or another is saying, well, you're just here for a paycheck. And there are some good benefits to working for the state. However, working in mental health and corrections is, I would never want to work anywhere else, to be honest. Not going into it thinking that I'm going to change someone, but be able to provide those seeds that they can then grow themselves. And then to see that in a system that does not nurture kind of growth and change, that's where I think that's what I like to see. That's the difference that I like to make. The other part is the whole idea of like safety and security of the public. How I can continue to assess those that are like actually criminally minded versus in finding those that are actually truly mentally ill, and not, again, kind of going to that court assessment of knowing right from wrong. So making sure that those that know right from wrong but still choose to do the things that they're doing are held accountable is also something that I do as a psychologist for the state of California. From there, you can work as kind of what we call line staff. So you're on the ground, boots on the ground, providing treatment to the incarcerated population. But then I have also promoted into being a senior psychologist specialist. And there's a lot of different kind of niches that we can kind of go into as a specialist. Initially, when I first stepped into the role, I was doing suicide prevention among the incarcerated population, and really found the area that I would like to continue to build my expertise. It's part of just part of the population. Like, I always think of it as being this pressure cooker. Like, there's risk factors that go into self-harm and someone being at that place where they may decide to end their life. But then with these risk factors, a lot of them, unfortunately, are going to be things that add up in our prison population, and we're like just housing them all in one spot. So trying to find ways to not only identify individuals that are struggling with that within the system, but then to provide those interventions in the prevention so that we can hopefully reduce individuals in the population from dying by suicide. That's, again, like, I always hesitate. I do a lot of training for all staff in the prison that the prisons that I've worked in. So I'm presenting to custody, I'm presenting to medical, and also my colleagues in mental health. And it's a weird mix to present to a group like that because you've got custody, and there's been a lot of changes even in the time that I've worked for the department, um, of how custody is viewing the rehabilitation aspects of their job as the officers, and then kind of being more welcoming to mental health coming in and also providing those services. But it is still very interesting to figure out how to present, to each individual, but trying to talk about suicide prevention is also something that, because it's not, we can come by our own experiences, whether it's where we work and we're responding to it or in our own lives. So I'm continue to grow that part of my professional, experience, but also knowing that in addition to the correctional population, we see a large number of officers and staff that work within corrections that are also at higher risk of committing suicide. So that's where I'd really like to start focusing. And as a forensic psychologist, some of my training and education helps lend itself to being able to kind of look at different risk factors and different lights that might help prevent staff from committing suicide. Um, but it's one of those things that when I stand up in front of a crowd, and I just did a training yesterday where it's like, I don't know if it's that it's a nerdy thing to say, or it's like one of those things that I just like kind of protect when I tell someone like I have this passion for, and I don't know that that's the right word, but suicide prevention is definitely the niche that I have found to be the most rewarding in my career. Um, Unfortunately, currently I'm took a different role and am now doing quality management. So unfortunately, like I feel like that's like the farthest step I could have taken from psychology, but it's still looking at kind of system surveillance now. So I'm looking at how mental health is functioning and providing that care and how effective it is to the population, and finding any trends that I can like maybe, um, hopefully steer different interventions before it becomes a huge problem that then we have other or bigger areas that we need to address. So that's currently where I'm at, is looking more at system surveillance and um, how to better provide care and get to the population that we need to. So kind of, definitely been a long road, but I still like every day I get to go and I get paid to have access to not just their medical record, but their custody record as well, which provides such a big picture of how and this person came in front of me. So definitely very, very rewarding career. It's one that I'm hoping, to eventually just retire from, to be honest. I don't see myself working with any other population. But for forensic psychologists, like again, we could kind of work anywhere psychology is provided. Um, Not
All
sure.
right. All right. Yeah, that was very informative. Thank you for sharing. And we do have a couple questions in the chat if you'd like us to kind of just start bringing those to you. Is now a good time? Okay.
Sure.
So the first question we have is around FBI criminal mind profiles on patients, or do you have any, have you worked with FBI criminal mind type profiles, or people going through the courts? I know you touched on some of this, but that was the first question.
Yeah. So usually by the time that they are in prison, they've already gone through the legal system and they've been sentenced. There are some individuals that, so if they are struggling with competence, so they don't, because of their mental illness, they can't help or assist their legal team in providing a defense for themselves, they would be considered, incompetent to stand trial. It doesn't necessarily mean that that crime goes unadjudicated or they don't they're not going to be going through a sentencing period through the courts. It just means that then they would go to a state hospital. So we have like Napa State Hospital, which is up closer to Sacramento, but we have several standalone state hospitals that they would go to and be provided treatment where hopefully their competence is restored. Usually medications are stabilized, and once they're able to assist with that defense, they go back to the courts and they go back to county, and then they go through the whole sentencing process. There are also individuals that it's not really that they were sentenced, but they were found not guilty by reasons of insanity. And I think sometimes, like, my family often think, well, does that just mean that they go back to the community? No, these individuals also go to the state hospitals and they're provided treatment. And it's not like they're receiving a prison sentence, but they have commitment terms, I guess, for a lack of a better term to put it, that they serve. And like there's a whole different process that goes through determining whether they're fit to return to the community or not. When they're in the state hospital like that and not yet a California state inmate, if they are too violent usually, or their behavior cannot be managed safely in a setting in the state hospital, they'll come to prison. But we don't see them as an inmate. We just are housing them. They get all of the privileges and all of the treatment that they would otherwise get as an inmate, but we call them safekeepers. So we're not again, they're not a sentenced prison or inmate to California. So I would say that in my experience with providing care to those individuals, there's court reports. And again, I could get into so many of the weeds on this one. Once they're in prison, an inmate or a safekeeper, if they continue to commit crimes, like assault is a big one among the prison population against themselves or peers or against staff, they can continue to get and receive new sentences for those crimes. So once a safekeeper comes to us, if they commit assault, they may then also get a new sentence that they have to go through the court system on. Each one of those then brings in a whole new kind of reporting period and process. So I think one of the examples that I worked on was a gentleman that I think he was in the court for 5 different cases. So just about every month I was doing a court report on kind of synthesizing his behavior that led to him coming to us, and then in the time period that the court had stipulated that we look at it. So I think that at least in the prison system, the state prison system, that's the closest I've gotten to kind of the court reporting. With regard to the federal investigations and the FBI, being state, I don't have much contact with the FBI. If I worked in the federal system, or anybody working in the federal system, that's definitely where they would have more contact with. I do have a colleague who has done a lot of training through Quantico. Like, he's gone a number of times, but because it's not the field is so big, I usually kind of, unfortunately, like kind of get glassy eyed when he starts talking about all the different trainings that he's gone to. But there are there are avenues to get to and do those things. Criminal profiling, it is something that the FBI does and has a lot of training and education that goes into it. But it's a very small niche. Like, it's a very like concentrated education that you have to go through, just because it's kind of like that criminal profiling. You just want to be very careful with how you put together that puzzle, because if there's one piece, you could mess somebody's life up completely. So it's not something that I've ventured into.
All right. Okay. Thank you for answering. Okay. So our next question is, have you seen an increase in mental health crisis episodes related to crime?
I think that there has definitely been, and to be honest, like mental health is not something new. People struggling with mental health is not something that is new. I think that it's just something that society has focused on more recently. And I would say in the last 10, 15 years or so, it's become kind of like this hot topic. And I hate that it's a hot topic. I hate that it's something like, well, is it that we're seeing an increase in mental health? It's always been there. It's always been there. It just we haven't always targeted it and treated it the way that it should be. And unfortunately, like even up through the early 2000s, um, seeing the invention or like bringing on these specialty courts, like most of the time, we didn't have a place to treat mentally ill individuals, so they went to prison. And it's a hard fact and it's unfortunate, but again, one of those great things about working for the state of California is that there are a lot of initiatives and a lot of things that we as voters have done to change some of those things. And then also the department, the correctional department, has been making huge steps in different directions and providing better treatment. So I don't know if that directly answers the question. It's always been there. I think that we're seeing maybe more talk of it just because it's something that um, again is on everybody's mind now, which is unfortunate. I think that mental health has been something that the correctional department in California has started to look at. The one that is more recent is looking at the substance use. That had always been something that was kind of known and something that was there and that we talked about in treatment. But now we have things like medically assisted treatment programs like methadone or Suboxone. And we have a specific group of mental health working in and providing substance use treatment. So, and that's another one of those things that's unfortunate that it's new, but I think since 2019 or so, kind of seeing this new program and department coming together and providing those services. Um,
Blake, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. Our next question is, have you ever been a part of a court case that has really impacted you?
I would say, I don't know if it's unfortunate or not. Not so much in my career as a psychologist, but again, with before I went into the substance abuse counseling, I did work as a conservator for the state. And that's really more where I was involved with the courts. There was an individual, severe psychosis and significant mental health history, found himself, his elderly dad, who had provided care to him his entire life, had just gotten to a point because of his age that he couldn't provide that care for his son, found himself to be out just outside the family home on the sidewalk with a butter knife, talking to himself and responding to things that doesn't make him dangerous, but to somebody that doesn't have that experience with mental health, it looked to be that this gentleman was aggressive and had a butter knife. So the police intervened, and it was around the time when, at least in Yolo County, an individual had been tased and had died, but was mentally ill. And it came out that it wasn't that he was aggressive or had a violent history. So this particular case was one that they thankfully the courts, his defense attorney got the conservator's office involved and really worked with the courts, the criminal side of the court, saying like, this gentleman does not need to go to prison. He hasn't necessarily even done anything that would require a sentence in that regard, but he needs more resources because his dad's no longer there to help keep him stable and on his medications. That case alone really stood out, and one that continues to impact kind of some of the decisions that I've made with my career. As part of a PhD program, you have to develop your own research project where, like, from start to finish, you are looking at the trends and the things in the field that have already happened, regarding whatever topic you want to do. And then you have to come up with this research question and then somehow like find the data around that. So in my case, I decided to look at, so once he went through the courts, and anybody has the right to a jury trial, everybody has that like jury of their peers, their right. And I always thought like, well, not everybody has that experience with mental illness. So how do individuals that are in the court system expected to get an unbiased jury if they don't have that experience with mental illness? And severe mental illness can look very, very aggressive. It can seem very dangerous to somebody that doesn't have the experience with that. And yet that bias isn't something that should be used in deciding and determining sentences. So I looked at whether or not, or how mental illness, and they have the right to be put on the stand in their own defense. This particular individual got on the stand and had talked about the plastic that was plastic tubing put into his stomach that he couldn't eat because it got caught on things, and it was all done out of a conspiracy by, to be honest, I can't remember, but it was all a conspiracy to keep him under someone's thumb. And that's how he presented on the stand. And that's what the jury's hearing. Like, if, as somebody that doesn't have experience with that, like, I don't want that living next to me, is kind of what I was hoping to see. Like, is there a bias that people bring into making those decisions as juries? And in the small, not that my sample size was huge and like very predictive, but I mean, I did find that there's correlation between the bias that, as much as we try and not let it affect our decisions, still seeps in and makes decisions for us. And especially in particular in cases where individuals are in the courts with severe mental illness.
Wonderful, thank you. I have another question. And earlier in the day, I think we had our funeral director, and they mentioned something that they might deal with a little bit. I think they called it compassion fatigue. And so I was wondering, being in a service-oriented kind of field and helping others with mental health, I would imagine that it's a lot to take on personally as well. So I was wondering, is that something you deal with, and what are some things that you do for yourself to kind of take care of yourself as well in your mental health?
That is a great question. And it was always one of those things, and it's always something that like myself and my peers talk about, like, well, what did you do today for your mental health? What did you do to take care of yourself today? Or like, how can I help you? Because today looks like it's been rough. Working with like the officers, like it's a very unique bunch to work with, officers. Like, you don't cry in prison kind of like mentality and mood, and in comes mental health, and they see you as potentially being that hug-a-thug. It's like, no, I'm here to provide care for someone. So I've had conversations with others that I myself don't do well when I don't, quote unquote, and I'm going to steal it from Grey's Anatomy, when I don't have my person in prison, like I'm not myself. So it's always trying to find those connections and people that I can talk to about some of the things that I deal with on a daily basis, who understand what I'm dealing with. And there's a certain level of confidentiality that I can't just come home and talk about my day and go about it. So finding that person in prison that I can talk to and just kind of like let it out, so it's not bouncing around and tearing holes in my psyche. That's definitely one way that I have found to take care of my mental health. Another thing, like a lot of mental health professionals will talk about, like, well, what are you doing for your self-care? And it's like, I think to a student, and from my experience, it's always been like, well, I'm not a runner, so I'm not going to work out, but I'm not going to say that out loud because I don't want them to think that I'm depressed and not working out. So trying to find those little things that you can do. It doesn't have to be, well, I go and get a massage every week. To be honest, I have found a road that I like to drive down in the mornings and then when I come home. So when I'm driving to work, So a little disclaimer or disclosure, I work in Vacaville, so it's against the foothills. And right now the foothills are green and they're beautiful. So in the morning, it's that serene calm. I usually say it in my mind, like the calm before the storm. I don't know what I'm driving into because each day is different. And then when I'm coming home, it's kind of like that, my transition, like, okay, I'm going to leave the problems at work and I'm just going to take in the beauty that's around me. And then I'm going to get home and deal with my kids and the mess that that has. So it truly isn't these big monumental things that I think a lot of professionals in my fields make it seem like we have to do massages and all these big grand things. So it's really just finding the little things to let go. Yeah. I also, so a lot of little things, but the big things that I have done, I love to repurpose furniture. So I have my little shed. I'm not going to call it a she shed. I think it sounds dorky, but I have my little shed that I get to go out to. It's my kid-free, work-free, stress-free zone. So I do have, it's a mix. It's definitely a mix of different things that kind of I've had to put into place.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Definitely feel that like the little things. I'm not a runner either, so I can relate finding those little, whether it's a sweet treat or something like that too. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Another question I had just for our students interested in going into this field, what is a way that maybe that they could kind of dip their toe into and see if if this might be something they're interested, whether it's like maybe job shadowing or just even like brochures or something they can check out if they're interested.
Mhm. So I know that the state has done a lot of career fairs lately. And to be honest, I apologize. I don't know what they present at those career fairs. But anytime, any opportunity, I know that just in like on I-80 on my way to work, I've seen billboards for the California Department of Corrections. Um, I think unfortunately, because of the population, we don't have a lot of job shadowing opportunities. But I think just finding those places that you can, um, like once they're released, there's a lot of programs with like parole and probation, especially that there might be opportunity there. To be honest, where I found my experience or being able to kind of get my foot in the water and not yet be licensed and being able to do the work is finding places that I can kind of not really stretch it, but like where else can I work with this population? So I found that substance abuse was that place that I could definitely get in and work. So finding different places that you might be able to volunteer. Um, the homeless shelters would be a great place to even just get your foot in the door and start working around and seeing if that's a population that you feel comfortable working with on a daily basis. Between that and any place that's going to just accept volunteers. Unfortunately, with mental health treatment, because there's such a confidentiality piece to it, there's not much with that you'd be able to do. But like I think growing up, one of the best pieces of advice that I got from my mom that I actually listened to was like, yeah, it's good to do the service oriented work, but why not go into like if you knew you wanted to do medical work, go work in a medical office. And I did filing. I found out very quickly, even just by doing the filing and calling for appointments, that I did not want to do dermatology. Like, no, thank you. Um, so just finding those things that you can do. I think also one of the questions that had been asked the last time that I was able to present was, what was the advice that I would have given my younger self? And I really like that question because unfortunately, and I think my mom would love to hear this, I will deny this outside of this if she ever found out that I said it, uh, is not thinking that I wasn't qualified or just to have the confidence to apply to any state job, to be honest. Like any entry level state job, gets your foot in the door for any promotion, no matter what it is. Not to mention the fact that, like, I think I started with a department at 32, and the next 20 years thinking of like being able to retire, like that's a lot of time. That's a long time as you're older. But if I had started when my mom was telling me at 18, like, hey, go work for the state, go do the same filing that you were doing in a medical office in a state department, I really, I would by all means say, like, go and find those entry level jobs, because especially right now, they're everywhere in any place that the state has to offer. And positions within even corrections. You can come into a prison as an office technician. Um, so absolutely, just see if that population is something that you want to work around.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jonathan, do you have any other questions that you'd like to ask?
I think I think just there's always a lot of questions. It's just so fascinating. But I would say for this the last, I guess, lingering question I have is for our students who are maybe they were in another class or unable to make this session today. Would it be okay if we compiled a list of questions? We won't send you, 30 students. What we'll do is we'd probably just come up with a list of questions and send them your way. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. And anybody that's wanting to even talk on an individual basis, that's another way of just building that, like, familiarity and connection to different jobs and things. I'm even open to that as well.
Yeah. There's I mean these presentations, there's always like so many questions, and I'm trying not to hijack it. And I know our students who will watch the recording will have some questions. So thank you for that. That's all I have, Blake.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming in and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, and sharing your stories, sharing the information, answering all of our questions, in advance for answering others. Really appreciate you coming back to our career fair. We love to see familiar faces, and we really appreciate you coming to not one but two career fairs now. So thank you so much. We really appreciate we and the students really appreciate your time.
Well, I'm the one that appreciates your guys' work in putting this together, and the opportunity to have a place in forum to talk about something that I've enjoyed doing. So I thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we would love to have you back.
Wonderful.
So but yeah, so it's been exciting 2 days, and kind of unfortunately the excitement dies down now, because that was our final session, and it's kind of bittersweet. It's been a really fun ride, but it's over. Our career fair's over. So but thank you everybody, students, and for tuning in and watching all of these amazing speakers. Please feel free to share all of these videos to friends and family that are interested in these careers once they go up on YouTube. So you can find them on our school's YouTube channel. You can also find them on our school's career fair website. So they will be available in both places. You'll be able to go and check out all of those recordings. It'll take a little while because we have a lot of amazing speakers and a lot of really good content. So go ahead and check those out. And thank you everybody so much, our speakers and our students, for coming to our 4th annual career fair. And that is a wrap on this year.